Perfect. Okay. So today we are going to talk about something that can be an issue whenever you've already written the contract, you've already accepted all the terms, and now you have a problem, and we go back to look at the contingency, and the contingency is not written in a way that gives any type of resolution to the issue at hand. Hello, Jenny, come on in. We've got three in the, I'm trying to make sure I don't look like a man, because when I pull my hair back, I look like a man. Anyway, we will move beyond that. Wendy, I'm sorry, you haven't had me on class yet. I'm squirrel like half the time. So anyway, a contingency is really important simply because you're trying to ward off issues before they happen. And the issues that we generally run into are disputes about what happens if, or what happens when, or what happens because X, Y, and Z. So a contingency is really, really, really important in order to get the transaction from offer to closing. Every offer that you write has a contingency in it of some kind. So let's actually talk about what is a contingency. I want you guys, before I show you the legal definition, I want you guys to tell me what a contingency is. And you can just blurt it out.
Something that needs to be satisfied or completed to satisfy the terms of the contract.
And Michelle said it's something that needs to be satisfied or completed or satisfied. You use both words.
I don't know.
Okay. To fulfill the terms of the contract. Anyone else? Very, very good, by the way. If then. Mm-hmm.
If this happens, then Space Shuttle Atlantis, with the German probe loaded into its cargo bay, was launched into a heliocentric orbit.
Can you mute yourself?
What was that?
Yeah, which I found. Yeah, does anyone else have a example of what a or a definition of what a contingency would be? Okay. So the definition, you two are very, very close. The definition of a contingency is actually a contingency in a contract is a condition that must be met before the terms of the contract become active. If the contingency is not met, the contract is null and void, and the parties are not obligated to fulfill their obligations. Contingencies are also known as conditional contracts. So in the legal world, and this is not a law class, of course, but I'm in contracts now, so this is what prompted me to talk to you guys about this topic. Is they call them in the legal world, they call our contracts conditional contracts. They don't use the word contingencies. But it is exactly what this term says. So if you think about a light bulb, if I come in and the light bulb and the lights are off in this room, the only way to get the lights on are to flip the switch. So the lights being on in this room are contingent upon me flipping that switch. Okay. So if I don't flip the switch, then the lights never light up. If I do flip the switch, then the lights light up and the room becomes lit. If you think about that in the way of a contract, then the contract doesn't light up, or the terms of the contract don't become enforceable until that contingency is met. And the reason that this matters is because when we are writing contingencies, we have to write them in a way that as they're written, the parties understand what needs to happen if the contingency, what needs to happen to get the contingency to be satisfied, and what happens if the contingency is not satisfied. And the biggest question is, who gets the earnest money, right? Or if the contract is void or voidable, because this says that the contract is null and void, but in all cases, that is not accurate. So type of contingencies. Here are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 I thought of. And I want you to tell me of contingencies that you have seen that aren't on this list. We had a really random one the other day, and I'm doing my best to think about it, to remember it, but I can't right now. So the first three are 24, 48, and 72-hour kickout clauses or kickout contingencies. Seller to sell contingency, buyer's replacement property contingency, financing contingency, inspection contingencies, and the good old mom and dad's got to approve the purchase of this home contingency. Those are the ones we all want to run from screaming. But they are there, and it may be the wife comes, writes the offer, negotiates the offer, but the husband's coming in next Wednesday and he must approve it. I was in law class, and I will eventually get the clip of this professor and record it on my phone and play it, because I literally wanted to crawl under my desk. I'm sitting in contracts, and they record all their classes now, because I'm in there. And I have a thing where they have to record them for me, but, cause I'm old and, I gotta listen to them like 5 times. But the contingency, we were talking about contingencies and real estate purchases, and he didn't know that I was a broker yet. He does now. And he spent probably 10 minutes of his 1-hour-and-15-minute lecture talking about how terrible realtors were and how messy their contracts were and how sloppy transactions were, and how he would be ashamed if any of his cohorts in his law practice had written offers as sloppy and lazy as realtors do. And I was sitting there going, oh boy, we're meeting after this class. So yeah, I'm going to eventually. And then when I said, I called him out and I was like, oh, I'm a real estate agent. What kind of questions do you have for me? He was like, oh, not you then, because you're in law school. But I'm going to get that clip, because it's unfortunately 80% of what he said might be true. Because realtors aren't lawyers. Realtors don't know how to write up legal jargon, and realtors don't understand the parts that have to be included in order to make it a solid contingency. So while we're here, I want you to tell me, is there any other contingency that you've ran into that's not on this screen?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I had a contingency recently that was dependent on the HOA approving. The buyer could put up a privacy fence on each side of the house, well, privacy fence period, and then install an in-ground pool. It's on a corner lot, and there's a walkway behind it. So they were given permission to do the in-ground pool. They were given permission to install the privacy fence on both sides. However, the back fence, which is currently looks like a horse fence, the wooden fence they were allowed to put black mesh on that fence behind their house, but they weren't allowed to build a regular privacy fence. So that was one that I just recently did.
Okay, very good. Jenny, how about you?
Well, I'm right now.
Oh, shoot. It's a thick one.
Yeah, contingency to receive planning and zoning approval.
Okay.
Contingent on appraisal or a survey?
That's right. That's another one. Anyone else?
Settlement.
A contingency on a settlement from like an estate or a lawsuit? Workman's comp. Okay.
And if it's a virtual contract, contingency on the client seeing the property in person.
Yep. That's kind of like mom and dad approving, but another sight unseen contingency. That's right. There's all kinds of them. And we have to know what type to write or how to write them. And the formula that I'm going to give you is really broken down, honestly, from the perspective of a realtor. So it's easy for you to understand it, but it incorporates every legal aspect that you need in a contingency. So I'm trying to teach you something that I've recently learned in a way that a realtor can understand it. And I think that's honestly the benefit to you all of me going to school, is I see both sides of it now, or I'm beginning to. Okay, so perfect. So there are 4 parts of a contingency, and I'm gonna have to make you all small here so we can all see it. There are 4 parts of a contingency. What do they want? They being the party that is wanting the contingency. What is the fix? So what resolves the contingency? What happens if the contingency is not fulfilled? And then on the flip side of that, what happens if the contingency is fulfilled? And then who gets the earnest money? Those are the 4 questions that you need to ask yourself every single time you do a contingency. And I do want to bring up the fact most people know that there's recommended contract phrases from Bluegrass Realtors that will help you with a lot of your contingency issues. But as I was looking through them today, there's not a few of them on here. So like a third party viewing and approving the house is not on here, I don't think, unless I've just looked over it. There is a first right of refusal and a 24-hour kickout, which are 2 different things. So anyway, you can go back to those recommended contract phrases and you can use those to help you with your contingency, because they all have these parts. And you can actually take some of the wording from those contingencies to input them in these 4 parts. So that way you feel like you maybe have created the perfect contingency. But that is on Bluegrass Realtors. I think we have it pinned on our Facebook page. If we don't, I will ask Summer to do that. We might start adding them in the loops now that I'm thinking about it, just having that form there in case you need to pull them up while you're writing an offer. So these are the 4 parts. So we're going to talk about each part individually, and then we're going to try to create one by ourselves after we go through this process. Okay. So the first part, and I don't know why this is here. I can't get this to go away. Oh, yes, I can. What do they want? What is the goal of the contingency? What are the buyers and the sellers' objectives? Are they keeping something from happening or wanting something to happen? So let's take a really simple inspection contingency right off the top of our head, or right off the top of our head that we can do fairly easy. What is the goal of an inspection contingency?
That it passes the inspection.
Okay. So the goal of the inspection contingency is that the inspection is passed. Who? So if we're thinking about it, the goal is to have a clear inspection. Who defines clear inspection?
Buyer.
The buyer. Okay, so we would immediately then say, okay, it's the buyer that wants it, and the buyer wants a clear inspection. What type of clarity is required on the inspection or approval? So if you say buyer must approve, and I know we have inspection clauses in our contract, but this is just an easier one. Buyer must approve the inspection report after the inspection is done, or something along those lines.
Buyer satisfaction.
That's right, to buyer satisfaction. So let's define buyer satisfaction. On what level is satisfaction? It's very subjective, right?
Yes, everybody's different.
Everybody has a different perspective. So in this situation, the goal of the contingency is to understand the buyer's expectations, understand what they're looking for, which is an inspection, and who is the one that is looking for the contingency. In our case, it would be the buyer. So the buyer wants something to happen in that situation. The buyer wants an approved or what word? Satisfactory. That's the word Susie used. That's what I was looking for. Satisfactory inspection. So in that case, we have to write it in a way that is clear what satisfactory is. So a lot of times we'll see inspection clauses that just say buyers to complete a satisfactory inspection. And it's like, I want to trip over a chord or something as I'm reading it, I feel like I'm tripping because there's nothing else there to tell me what happens next. So what happens next is, what is the fix? So the fix here, we've already talked about it, is the satisfactory inspection results. But what is satisfactory? And I know you probably are like, gosh, Kristy, I can't define what is satisfactory on the contract. Like I can't put that in there. Well, we can in the way of making it clear, to the seller or to the buyer, they're going to inspect these things like our contract says, and based on their subjective feeling, this is what's going to have to be cleared, or they're going to ask you for repairs. So maybe inspections wasn't the easiest one. Maybe we should have done like mom and dad, but go ahead.
If you're doing an inspection and you're using the current contract, it defines all that. But
Mhm.
if your home has a pool
Mhm.
or a barn or a shed that you want inspected,
Mhm.
then you also have to add that in there because that's typically not included in
The
lease,
discovery. So
right?
yes, in our new contracts, the discovery actually is the entire property. And I actually got into a debate, not a debate, well, a little bit, over the termite inspection a couple weeks ago, because the seller was upset that the buyer asked for the barn to be treated. And she said the barn is not a part of the real estate. And I said, it absolutely is. Go back and look on the contract, and it says the entire property. So that includes trees, that includes stumps, that includes wood logs all the way back on the back of the property, that includes the barn. And it was $600, but to treat the barn. But that was like a realization to that agent, because they had thought the entire time that it was only the house that was to be
I
inspected.
guess maybe I'm thinking from the inspector's perspective,
Mhm.
they typically don't include those items unless he requests, so.
Yeah, that's right. They don't, because the barn was an extra inspection fee for the buyer.
Always
So,
extra.
so yeah, pool is always extra. So when, you're looking at the fix is, the question is what is the action that's going to make the fix happen? So the satisfactory repair or something along those lines is the action that is going to make the, contingency be fulfilled. And then we also have to have the time frame for completion of the proposed, that's actually supposed to say of the action. So sorry about that. I wrote solution. Whoops, back. Oh my gosh, it's all broken now. Hold on just a second. Present, here we are. So so what we've covered so far is what is the problem, and then what is the fix. The problem is that the seller or the buyer needs the house to be inspected. The fix is to have the inspection. So now we're putting in there that we have a contingency in the contract to have an inspection. The action that will make that happen is an actual property inspection, and the time frame for completion of that fix is X amount of days. So you need a deadline in your contingency, so that way they're not open-ended. They're not to the end of the contract or for eternity. Time inspections are one of the things that I rarely see, or time frames are one of the things that I rarely see in a contingency, if we even see one at all. So it's very important to have those in there.
We fall back to what the contract says within X amount of days, right?
Yeah, I'm just using the inspection as like an example that comes up most often. It's probably not the best one, but
So you're saying as far as timeline, we could say, I mean, as far as the inspection is concerned, we should be able to know the answer to that, whether we're happy with it or not, within our due diligence period.
correct. Yeah. Correct. So what happens if the contingency is not fulfilled or is fulfilled? So the question here is there a penalty for not fulfilling the condition? So if they don't have an inspection within the time period, what happens to the buyer? What is the penalty? So what is the remedy for the buyer not fulfilling their condition. Will the contract be void automatically, or will it be voidable at the option of the parties? And who has the right to do that voiding or to make that option? Because a lot of times the individual may or may not believe that they have a right, and they think they do. So there's been many times the seller's been like, well, I don't want to sell to you anymore because you've asked me for too many repairs. Well, the seller doesn't have the right in our current contracts to void the contract. The buyer has the right to void, because the buyer is one with the inspection contingency, and the buyer is the one that can say, fine, I'll buy it without you doing anything. The seller can say, I'm not going to obligate myself to any more terms of the contract by fixing things, but the buyer is the one that actually has the right to say, this contract is void because we can't come to terms. In our old contract, it was a little bit different. In this new one that we use now is, it's in the buyer's hands. Does anybody?
Kristy, I have a question. So what I'm hearing you say is that we need, even though the inspection is part of the due diligence period, in the due diligence period, we need to make a separate contingency stating that about the.
This is just an example. No, this is, the
No.
inspection is already built into our current contracts. That's why
Okay,
it may
okay.
not have been the most best example to use.
Okay, good.
So
Okay.
let me change it to mom and dad have to approve. I'm just gonna start talking about that one. Let me just change it. Mom and dad have to approve of the purchase of the house. So the issue is mom and dad has to approve. The solution or the fix is that mom and dad comes and looks at the property within so many days of contract acceptance. Now, if mom and dad don't show up to check out the property and you're beyond the 14 days that they were allotted to come and look at the property, what happens if that contingency is not fulfilled? Is the buyer now obligated to buy? Is that how you want it to roll? Or is it the, the seller can get out of the contract? Like, you've got to decide what the next step of that process is.
I would think they're in trouble.
Well, it depends on how you write it.
But
So,
the buyer is still, obligated for the purchase.
and it totally depends on, if you write it to say, buyer's mother must approve the purchase of this home within 7 days of contract acceptance, period, and you leave it. It doesn't say what happens if the mom doesn't approve. It doesn't say what happens if the mom does approve. And it doesn't say what happens if no one makes the effort to approve. Does that make sense? Like, there's still 3 things out there that haven't been realized in your contingency. So to make it a correct contingency, you would say, up to this point, you would say, buyer's mother must come and approve the purchase of this property within 7 days of contract acceptance. And if buyer's mother does not approve, the buyer is allowed to void the contract at their option, with their earnest money being refunded to the buyer. So that would be, and if the mother doesn't come to approve, then the buyer is locked in after the 7 days and the contingency is removed, or something along those lines. So you have to really flush out all the things that could potentially happen within reason, and to determine who gets what and what happens if it happens or it doesn't happen. Is that clear as mud? Clear as mud? Okay. So the next thing is, who gets the earnest money if the contingency is not completed, or if it is. So note here that the earnest money is a vital part of the contract that rewards the person or party who does not breach. It is one of the mechanisms in the contract to induce the buyer not to breach after acceptance, and to cause the seller to accept the buyer's initial offer to purchase, while understanding that the buyer's loss of the earnest money is part of the punishment for breach. And I could have put punitive damages there, but it's not really, it's more of like a remedy. But the question that we have to ask each other in the contract is who retains the earnest money if the contingency is fulfilled. 90,
I would say it's not.
9 times out of 10, it will always go to the buyer. Because if the buyer fulfills the contingency and they close, then obviously they get credit. If they fulfill the contingency and they ask for a release within their rights built into the contingency, then they get it back as a refund. So normally it is the buyer. And then who retains the earnest money if the contingency is not fulfilled? So if the contingency is not fulfilled, then you are likely the buyer or seller, whichever one wanted the contingency, is likely in breach. So that means the other party would be the one to get the contingency or the earnest money. But we would have to write that out in the contingency. Does anyone have any questions regarding?
Well, when I do one of those, I say somewhere in one of those forms, it says, all parties sign a release to that effect. But I always say that the earnest money will be returned to the buyer within 3 business days.
Yeah.
Because I don't like them hanging on to it.
Time frame is a big deal. There's a lot of times that sellers are just angry and they refuse to sign a release, and we can't, as an office, release the earnest money unless the release is signed, because that release actually releases 2 things. It releases the earnest money from our possession, giving it back to the buyer, and it releases our liability as agents and the seller and the buyer's liability as parties to the contract. So it actually does 2 things. Some people may want to release the earnest money, but then not release the liability contained in the contract. I've had that come up before. Or they want to release the liability, but they don't want to release the earnest money, which is harder. So, but our form is both. And that's what they're doing. They're not just releasing earnest money, they're releasing their liabilities. It's very interesting to see. And I was trying to come up with some examples, but I didn't do it. But most of the time it is 1 sentence. Example, seller must sell their house at 123 Main Street. Okay, well, what else? Awesome. Fantastic. So what happens next? So, you know, there's all these little things that that we need to work through. We need to make sure that we do when we have earnest money or contingencies. And then this is huge. Be sure to review the final contingency when it is written to ensure it makes sense. Sometimes we read them and it's like gibbly gush and we have no idea what you're trying to say. Or we understand what you're trying to say, but there's 30 different misspelled words and it really looks bad when we're checking the doc at the end of the deal, because we know that attorneys have seen that document, loan offers have seen that document, we've seen the document, the buyers, the sellers, the other realtors. Heck, they could have passed around their office and laughed because there's 30 different words misspelled, but we just want to make sure that you look as professional as you possibly can, because we want you to stand out above the crowd in our market. So when you type an offer, don't forget to read it again and make sure there's no typos. Many contingencies will be used repeatedly. So once you do this and you have it down, they will be easier to write because you'll think of the 4 steps of the contingencies. And then use contract phrases that BGR provides to make sure you're not practicing law. So any one that you can pull out of this 5-page BGR recommended contract phrases, if you can use them from here, use them from here, because they were written by attorneys and they have all of the 4 parts. But what I would like to do is I would like to hit pause. We have lunch here in the office and I'm going to let the gal who brought us lunch talk to you for just a second. So that way she can be, yeah, you didn't know that? Heck yeah. Lunch. So she can be in front of you all. So I'm going to actually figure out how to get her in front of the screen because I'm not sure how to do it, but let me go grab her real quick. And then we're going to write a contingency together. And we're going to vote on which one we're going to do. We might do your planning and zoning one. Hold on. Do you want to come talk to me real quick? Okay, you just want to, yeah. Okay. Did anybody learn anything from today? Was this class valuable so far to you? Do you feel like you understand contingencies a little bit more?
Yes.
I do, because I've been guilty of writing it and not saying what happened to the business.
Uh-huh.
So I've missed the steps before on that.
That's okay. Okay, come and introduce yourself. I know Tyann, and if you stand here, they can see you online too. I know Tyann invited you here, so I wanted to just give you a time to introduce yourself and thank you for the lunch that you brought us today.
You're welcome. My name is Nancy Carter. I'm with Revolution Mortgage. You may or might have heard of it. So we were Geneva and we switched to Revolution. So you may work with some folks with Geneva in the past. If you are, keep working with them. If you're not, I'd be happy to work with you. I can do all the loans that everybody else can do. A couple things I'll point out is my husband's retired military, so I have done VA loans forever. Know them inside and out. I'm actually doing a deal right now with, and I'm licensed into other states. I've kept my license in other states. I did do them in all 50 before. I'm doing one right now in Mississippi that the agent called me because a company that I won't say the name, everybody thinks is really good in VA loans, which is not good VA loans. Was like, hey, they got a lot of fees. Would you look at it over? Look at his information, said, hey, his COE, which is certificate eligibility, isn't approved in the VA even. So they're giving him pre-approval to buy a house. He can't buy a house until this goes through. This could be short. This could take months. And actually I've been working with him now for over a month because once I looked at this thing and said, he's now of course working with me. I actually made a phone call to the VA today and actually got a hold of someone who actually did the research and said, oh yeah, we can pull this from this was medical records. I can see, even though it was in reserves, National Guard, he actually did do a tour. I will issue his COE, even though he was denied originally for it. I know things you need to do. A couple loans that we do that I'm really happy about that I've done research on is we can do, if you are 1099, not in your business name, but in your own name, I can do a loan on 1099, never look at tax returns, take 90% income. Okay. If you're self-employed, I can do bank statements. That can be your personal and that can be your business. Again, not looking at tax returns. So for your self-employed buyers, or like yourself, long as it's not in a 1099 cannot be in business. Your business bank accounts, I can use as a bank statement. I can do both of those. Okay.
So what kind of rate is on something like that?
It just varies.
Is it based on your credit score?
It is
still?
based on credit score. So
Is there a penalty for just doing bank statement loans or 1099 loans?
no. Bank statement's going to be a little bit lower interest rate than a 1099. But I'm seeing depending upon credit scores, they're pretty good. I will say right now, I'm looking for somebody, USDA right now rates are really good. I don't know why, but USDA rates are actually lower than VA rates, which is normally unusual. So if somebody wants to go USDA right now, the rates are like in the 5s, which is pretty unusual. So that is something if you have somebody going USDA. If you have, I know this market's not huge, but if you have $1 million homes, I will tell you our jumbo rates are really, really good. I closed one in Denver and we beat everybody in the rates.
Do you remember that was?
We closed about 6% on a jumbo with no points. Now he could have bought down points and got down lower, but he's like, no, I'm going to wait until what happens next year and see about. But I thought a 6 for a jumbo was.
Is there a minimum credit score for a jumbo?
No.
Minimum difference?
No minimum difference. We'll go down to 580. That's what we'll go down to. We also I've got a lot of people looking at doing HELOCs. I've got an investor, and this is sort of good too for people who are wanting to fix their house to sell their house. I have an investor that will go up to 90% if they're looking and use a contractor. So what they'll do is you have to have a contractor set up. They'll do an appraiser based on what it would appraise for when it's done. That's big. Most HELOCs only do it on what it currently is appraised for. They'll do it, hey, when this is done, what would it appraise for? And then go 90% of what it would be appraised for. There's no penalty of paying it sooner. If they were to keep the HELOC, they do not charge fees every year to monitor it either, which most locations charge fees every year just to keep up with the loan. But no, there's no penalty to close it whenever they want. So that's a good one too, if you have someone who needs to fix the house, but they do have contractors to do it. They cannot do it themselves. Otherwise, it goes to 80% of what the price is.
Do you have a time frame in which you have to complete the construction? Is it 12 months or less?
Yeah, it's 12. Well, this is not a construction loan. This is, they're going to look at, hey, you have somebody come in, depends upon the scope. So
What about a construction?
we do construction loans. Those are going to be one-time closes.
One-time closes.
One-time close. So a 2-time close would be that you would do the construction, we would close it and close the construction. then you would take another loan out for the purchase of it. A one-time close is basically, it's all built in, you have your interest rate there, pretty much set in, it can normally float down. But you're only closing and paying closing costs one time. You're not paying closing costs twice. Title fees and closing twice.
Okay, so if I got a client that wants to borrow $950. And they want to build a barn and a house on some property we already sold. I'm assuming they're doing construction draws,
Yes.
but are they paying a payment based on the total or based on the draws?
They are paying a payment based on the interest accruing for the time frame. So they do an interest only on the loan amount is what it's done in the construction loan. So the full payment doesn't click in until it's done, is how the construction loans work. So it's interest only draw is what they're paying on. So if they've got 4 draws, 5 draws, 6, depends upon the investor, how the investor does it. Some only do 4, some do 6, some do more, but they're paying interest only on the loan until it's closes as a final. When the work's done.
Interest only on
The
total?
the total amount, yeah. Is how those normally work. And that normally, each investor's a little different. Those are normally a point to 2 points higher than what the final interest rate really is how those normally are. Each investor's a little different, but on a rule, it's a point to 2 points normally higher. And they normally will let them float down at the end if rates are lower than where they locked in at.
Will USDA do the land value? Will they do a construction loan?
They will do construction. USDA, VA, FHA, conventional, all will do construction loans. You just have to fit the criteria of each loan program. So USDA, you have to minimum 620 credit score. That's their rule, and then you have to fit within their income limits. And they do stricter income limits. You can't make over X% in that area. It's going to depend upon, family of 4 is one, you go over family of 4, it's another, and they count all income. So if you have other people in your house making income, they count everybody's income. Yeah. So that's something people don't realize. Yeah, USDA counts everybody. If your kid's under 18, then you can exclude it, but if they're 18 in college, no. So,
They keep moving out.
yeah,
They
but
keep me from getting along, let me get out on the street now.
yeah, but USDA is very strict on that. So those are their rules. They don't care. So.
Does anyone else have any questions for her?
Can you repeat your name, please?
Nancy Carter. And I'll leave some cards and some flyers. And I do work weekends. I do work evenings. You get my cell. All my buyers have my cell phone. I've had people call me at 10, 11 o'clock at night to do things. I normally tell them though, if you're going to do that, let me know ahead of time so my phone is still on.
Yeah.
Or, hey, we're going to go look this weekend. Are you available if we need to do something? But yeah, I work all the time. I had somebody call me at 10 o'clock at night. We found a home. Can we have the letter now? Sure.
Yeah.
But you need to fill out the application. So at 10 o'clock at night, I was doing the application,
Yeah.
so they get approved. But yeah, guys,
Do you
anything?
have an online application?
Well, I-
Yeah.
Yeah, and as long as I know, I'm pretty strict on giving you guys a pre-approval. So when they send me stuff, I'm like, I want your W-2s, I want your pay stubs, I want your bank statements. If I don't see that, I don't give a pre-approval.
So it's a pre-approval, not a pre-qual.
Everybody's a pre-qual. Unless it goes to underwriting, you don't really have a pre-approval. So a lot of lenders will say, oh, I'm giving you a pre-approval. It's not really, nobody's giving you a pre-approval unless it's been through underwriting and underwriting says it. However, I will say mine are really more of a pre-approval because I literally have looked at every single document. I will tell you, most lenders don't do that, but I won't. And if they don't give it to me, I'll tell you, hey, this is what they put in. I don't know if it'll go through or not. If you want it, I'll give it to you, but I can't guarantee it's going to close. Just like the guy I looked at this in Mississippi, I went over there going, you got a lien on there, judgment, you're going to get that fixed. He's like, what are you talking about? The other lender to tell me that. I'm like, well, they didn't look at your credit report. I won't give you approval till you figure out what this is and get it cleared because underwriting is going to deny this. I look at everything. So it's not just a throw it on the wall and hope it sticks.
Thank you, Nancy.
You're very welcome. Again, I'll leave you guys some cards and some flyers, and then we've got Olive Garden the other way.
Sounds good. Thank
So,
you.
and I'll be around for any questions.
It should be 15 or 20 more minutes.
It was very informational. Thank you.
That's good.
Okay, so now we're going to practice. We are going to write a contingency, sure. We are going to, we're going to write a contingency, and I'm going to pull up Word if I can get it. And we're gonna write it together. So can you guys still see my screen, a blank Word document?
Mhm.
Okay. What contingency do you want to write? Let's do one that's not, super difficult.
The zoning sounds good.
Okay.
And it's just one that I've never dealt with, so it'd be nice to know what to do.
Let me see on the sheet. Let me see what her actual contingency is.
I'm starting to do more commercial stuff, so that's I'm dealing with zones more, so it'd be nice to know.
Okay, so let's talk about planning and zoning. So the issue that we're looking at is, this parcel of land she has, she wants to take 40 acres and divide it into, 10-acre tracts. Okay, so that's the issue. 40 acres divided into 10-acre tracts. So my first prompt was, so what do they want? So instead of issue, because that's more legal terms. What do the buyers? Okay, that's what they want to achieve. Okay. So what is the fix? So what is the fix? What do you think you have to do to divide 40 acres into 10-acre tracts?
You have to get it surveyed.
Okay, so the first thing we have to think about is the survey. What else?
Confirming with planning and zoning what you possibly can do with property.
Mm-hmm. Is that it, or is there anything else?
I'm sure there's more.
Anyone else? Okay, so let's work off these two. The fix is the survey. So the next question is, how do let's write out what the fix is in actual sentences. So buyer to order, sorry, I'm trying to type and look at the screen and it's not working. Order and pay for a survey that divides up the 40 acres into 10-acre ACCRE tracts of land. Okay, so buyer to order and pay for a survey that divides up 40 acres into 10-acre tracts of land. So our next sentence would be, if buyer if buyer does not or cannot divide the 40 acres of land into 10-acre tracts in a satisfactory manner, buyer may choose at their sole option. No, that's choose sole. Was that right? Sole option. At their sole option to void this contract with earnest money being refunded to the buyer. Okay, so that's the first part of the fix. So buyer to order and pay for a survey that divides up 40 acres into 10-acre tracts of land. I looked at your sheet. Yep, time frame. See, look, this is why we're doing this together. So when do we want the buyer to have the survey completed? Buyer to order and pay for a survey within 45 days of contract acceptance that divides up the 40 acres into 10-acre tracts of land. If buyer does not, meaning they don't take the action at all, or they cannot, meaning it's impossible to divide it into 4 10-acre tracts, then at that point, the buyer may choose that their sole option, and that means that the seller can't decide, oh, I want to void it, because the buyer could then buy it at 40 acres and leave it at 40 acres. To void this contract with earnest money being refunded to the buyer. What I've seen is buyer to order and pay for a survey on the land. And it's like, what? And the survey is now included in your due diligence. So be sure that if you know they want a survey, this is side note, Kristy squirrel moment. If they want a survey, then surveys on large parcels are taking 60, 90 days. And if there's leaves on the tree, and I know this sounds silly, but if there's leaves on the trees, they can't use the laser. So they have to do it like on foot, and they're 10 times more expensive and they take 10 times longer to do. So the best time to do a farm survey or a wood foresty type survey is when the leaves are off the trees, just FYI. So now that's not our only contingency, right? Our only contingency is they want to achieve the ability to divide 40 acres into 10-acre tracts. There's another municipal type authority that has control on whether or not the buyer can do this. So this would actually cause 2 contingencies. And the second contingency would be the buyer to obtain planning, what county? Jessamine County Planning and Zoning approval to divide, record, and sell. Are you gonna sell them? And sell the 40-acre land into 10-acre tracts.
Kristy, sorry to butt in. We can't see the Word document on Zoom.
Oh, someone said that we could. Okay, hold on. Well, son of a gun, thank you. Because I was like, can everybody see this? And I heard a yes, so I wanted to make sure.
Sorry, I thought what was on the screen at that moment I saw.
Okay, can you see this now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna go over it again, just now you can visualize it. What do the buyers want to achieve? They want to divide 40 acres of land into 10-acre tracts to sell. That's important, because if they just want to divide it and give it to their family, but keep it like all under the same, name or whatever, it might be different, but they're going to sell it. And then the fix is a survey, and the fix is planning and zoning approval. So the buyer to order and pay for a survey within 45 days of contract acceptance that divides up the 40 acres into 10-acre tracts of land. That could probably be worded a little better. If buyer does not or cannot divide the 40 acres of land into 10-acre tracts in a satisfactory manner, buyer may choose that their sole option to void this contract with earnest money being refunded to buyer. And then look, we need to put here, and a release signed by all parties to that effect. Okay. This is why you read it over, because in our reading, Leanne added a timeline and I added the release. So just in our reading, we realized we left something out, because you're actually thinking like a timeline in your brain. At least that's how I do it. I think of like, okay, this is what's happening today, but what do I need to do to get here? It's like turning on streets for directions. Between here and my house are like 5 turns. I need to go down Ruscio, take a right on Wellington. And it's the same process. It's just with actions instead of street names.
So whenever you mentioned, if the timeline is not met, release, how did you state that, as far as, getting everything, the monies back to the buyer?
I put it in here, if buyer does not or cannot divide the 40 acres of land. So if they just don't act at all, so they don't do it. Or if they can't do it, meaning there is no reasonable division of this property. The 40 acres of land into 10 acres, that gives them an out either way. So if the buyer, like you could also change this, and this, I'm gonna make this a different one. If your seller says no, if the buyer doesn't do their contingency, then I want their earnest money. So if the buyer just sits on their laurels for the next 45 days and doesn't order a survey, then you could actually change it and make it like this. If buyer cannot divide the 40 acres of land, then you would come here and you would put, if buyer does not complete, if buyer does not order, pay for, and complete the required survey, the seller will retain all earnest money and buyer will, and all parties will sign a release to that effect. So this one says something different. This one says, if the buyer can't, meaning there's no reasonable way for the buyer to be able to divide the property, they get the earnest money back. But if the buyer does not order, pay for, and complete the required survey, they just don't take the action to fulfill the contingency, then the seller will retain all earnest money and all parties will sign a release to that effect. So you have 2 very different contingencies here. And that's why it's so important that when you're writing these contingencies, you're thinking through how the contingency is most favorable to your client and what is fair and what will actually get the contract to be accepted. Because if we just wrote the first one and we didn't think, and if we didn't have this in it, so if we just wrote the first one and said, if buyer cannot divide, then it doesn't speak to if the buyer does not take any action. Does everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions so far? This is a good one, Jenny. Thank you.
What if, Kristy, what if the buyer during this period decided, I don't actually want to split that up? Then would both parties then just sign something to remove the contingency so that if they want to continue with the purchase?
You could do that. You could just do an addenda. So at that point, because they don't want you to go back and edit a contract after it's been executed, you would do an addendum removing the contingency, and you would label the contract as like the counterpart to the addendum.
I know I have been curious about this, and I think I know the answer, but when you add an addendum later, you don't go back to the original contract and put that in the addenda section, correct?
Correct, because because you are, and I did not know this until I sat in contract. So if I've ever told you wrong, I apologize ahead of time. When you have a contract and the contract is executed, you have a complete document. And the only way you can edit that document is through modification. And modifications are not reflected on the original document. Modifications are reflected on an additional document that cites the original document.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
this has been my funnest class ever, just in case anybody wants to know, like, I love contracts. I could stay in it for the whole school year.
Kristy, can you repeat that last thing that you said about the contract, just that last couple sentences?
The modification form.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
So when you have a contract and you and your buyer and the seller has come to terms and everyone signed off on the contract, that is one completely executed document. When you have that document and there needs to be a modification. So let's say, like in Susie's example, we're removing this contingency and the buyers just decided that they're going to keep the 40 acres, and they don't want to go through all this trouble of splitting it up. They will add that addendum, and that addendum will do what's called citing the original contract. That's why contract numbers are so important, because in the addendums or in the modification document, it actually would be a modification document, and we probably need to add those at Bluegrass Realtors, but that's besides the point right now. In that modification document, you will cite to the original document, and that's how you modify the contract. You don't ever go back to the original document and change that.
Okay. So then does that also need to be sent, I'm assuming, to the title company, or
If it's material to the transaction? So if the title company must see, okay, so let's say, you have a contract for $400,000, and halfway through the transaction, the seller realizes that if they sell it for $400,000, they are going to be taxed exorbitantly, and they just don't want to be taxed. So they go to the buyer and they say, let's modify this contract. You get a $200,000 loan. I will be a seller financer for $200,000. So I don't have to bear this tax. That would need to go to the lender. That would need to go to the title company. If it is I'm leaving the fridge. Oh, wait, I've changed my mind. I don't want to leave the fridge. That's not material.
okay.
So I think when you decide on what you're going to send to the lender and the title company, I mean, generally, yes, you're going to send the entire contract, but a lot of times those additional addendas, like extending the inspection period, those aren't really material, and it's not going to benefit them to have it or not have it.
So if it's gonna affect the deed per se.
Correct.
Yeah, or the title search. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so let's do the planning and zoning one. So the buyer to obtain Jessamine County Planning and Zoning approval to divide, record, and sell the 40-acre tract of land. And sell as 10-acre tracts, 10-acre tracts. So the process, and this is just another learning moment, I guess, the process of planning and zoning is the planning and zoning will actually not approve a rezone, a divide, a recording, or the ability to sell a tract of land if it's not the owner that's petitioning them to do it. So the buyer cannot actually fulfill this full contingency prior to closing. But what the buyer can do is they can get a really good vibe about what the planning and zoning is going to approve. They can take it to the meeting. They can get like their thumbs up, but they actually will not do the legwork to subdivide or anything like that until after the buyer becomes owner. So this contingency is actually going to be a little different than how we have it written now. And it's in order to make it as less vague as possible, we'll have to do some really crafty structure here. So the buyer to obtain preliminary approval, not full, and this approval will not be binding. To divide, record, and sell the 40-acre tract land as 10-acre tracts. If buyer cannot or does not obtain within how many days? 30 days of, yeah. It'll probably be more like 60. Because you probably have to go to them twice. They'll wear you out the first time. Will not be binding to buyer or seller. If buyer cannot or does not obtain preliminary approval within 60 days of contract acceptance, the buyer may, at their sole option, void this contract and all earnest money will be refunded to buyer with all parties a release to that. Okay. Okay, so that's how I would write that one.
Can you read that one more time? I'm sorry.
The buyer to obtain Jessamine County Planning and Zoning preliminary approval. And then in parentheses, I put not full approval, and this approval will not be binding to buyer or seller to divide, record, and sell the 40-acre land as 10-acre tracts. If buyer cannot or does not obtain preliminary approval within 60 days of contract acceptance, the buyer may, at their sole option, void this contract and all earnest money will be refunded to the buyer with all parties signing a release to that effect. So in this fix, we have worked through all 4 parts of a contingency. What do they want? What is the fix? What if it's not fulfilled, and who gets the earnest money? We've hit all 4 parts of that on this whole thing. Now, there are some very extreme contingencies that I will probably say to you that has multiple parts, and we need to actually get an attorney involved in order to write it. But these that are basic, relatively basic, can be written by us without us practicing law. And that's what we have to be really careful of.
So you would use the first and third?
Yeah, depending on, it's for you, right? Yeah, I would use the first and third. Because it doesn't give the seller the right to void anything. And if you write a really good, strong contingency, chances are the other agent is just gonna be like, okay, that's their contingency. If you get one that's really knowledgeable and they understand, how to build contingencies, then they may come back and ask you to do something different. Like if the buyer does not act, do they still get their earnest money back? No, the seller should get it really. But these are basically how I would write them. Any questions? Does anyone have one that they want me to write out real quick for them while we've all got? I think we've got a couple more minutes. What time is it? Oh, we're 9 minutes over, but that's okay. Does anyone have any questions or anything? None?
Do not. Thank you, Kristy.
You're very welcome.
It's been very informational. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. I hope that you picked up something today and that you're able to use this. And we recorded it. So if you need to go back and watch it again, if you have a contingency you need to write and you don't understand how to do it, please feel free to call me. Check the recommended contract phrases first, and I will tell Summer to upload those into .loop so that we have them on the loops. And I'm always available if you need anything. Pray for me. In an hour, I sell my house for the last 15 years.
Oh,
No, I'm probably gonna cry when it's all over and done with because I'm exhausted. But you guys have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you very soon.
bye.
Bye.
So you inside.
Yeah.